All right, starting now. Okay. Welcome, life-saving family. I am here today, Tom O'Neill, with Shane Scoggins, 2014 National Board Race Champion. He has many other accolades to which I will not note because I know it makes him feel uncomfortable. But I actually will bring up one because it's a proud moment for me as well. Shane and I were on the 2016 World Championship team together, in which we earned a bronze medal in the Taplin relay, upsetting the Australians. And I think that was the first time in USLA history that had been done. So let's get to some board race review from the 2014 USLA National Championships. So Shane, welcome. Before I start the video, I've got it up and ready to go. I noticed that everyone is very tightly bunched together. What are you thinking about executing off the start?
So one thing that I think a lot of swimmers don't have is actual mechanics in sprinting. And what you'll see with Brian and a couple other people, they're low, like they're loaded in a block. Their other arm is cocked and ready to go because your opposite knee and arm move together. And so the guys that are a little lower and have a little more tension in their legs and that forward angle are going to be able to react a little quicker to that gun. Then immediately after it goes off, you need to be thinking foot speed, essentially. Like some of these Australian kids that are insane board paddlers also are AFL players. And they're like, their feet hook and they run like an actual sprinter, but you're doing it with a board under your arm, which takes a little getting used to.
So with that said, and before we start the video, is there anything there specifically that people at home can replicate in their training? So like the foot speed, is that something you can develop, or is it just a God-given talent, so to speak?
No. So like anything you do has got a mechanic to it. And I think that everyone listening probably swam competitively and you understand the stroke technique. Like with running, it's the same concept. And Brian Costello's a way better resource than I am. But you're not really getting out of the drive phase of a sprint. So if you look at like Olympic sprinters or you YouTube creep on guys that are coming out of blocks, their feet are on separate tracks. They're a little bit more in their posterior chain like their glutes. And if you are running with resistance or you're running up some hills, but you're still able to like not take these large loping steps, but these like faster, more powerful ones, you can kind of get a portion of a board lane when you go to hit the water.
Awesome. I like that a lot. All right.
Destin's Cooper Halligan, as well as the man who's been a bridesmaid more than he cares to remember, Cal State's Shane Scoggins. As mentioned earlier, a good start, not only critical, but essential in the board race. If you get caught behind the other paddler's wash, it can feel as if you're paddling uphill. Ryan Matthews in the prone position from LA County. He is challenged in years past in this event as well. And right away, the noticeable stroke of Shane Scoggins, California State.
I notice off the start, you got a good start. It looks like a smaller group up front of yourself, Cooper Halligan, Ollie Puddock, and Brian Murphy. Brian, I think, was at the very end, so lane 18. There's it's usually 16 in the race, but they had 18 competitors here. I think you were in lane 10. So maybe after the first 100 meters, what are you thinking at this stage of the race?
I'm thinking, so coming off the beach is like coming off the wall in a swim race. You're never going to be as fast as when you left something solid. So how can you have the equivalent of a really tight streamline and a really effective dolphin kick in the board pedal version? So you're thinking like you need to put the board down in clean water. You need to have that thing land good and flat so you don't like slap and lose your momentum. Ryan Matthews is a highly underrated paddler and surfer, and so he must have stepped in a hole and found himself on his stomach, and then now he is stuck behind his washes. Well, I'm looking at two concepts. Concept A is the first portion of the race is its own separate race, which is to the first camp. So you cannot leave the race unless you're like markedly better than everyone else. So in my case, it's do not let the race leave you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to get like clean water. I'm trying to like be assertive with my ability to put my arms in the water, and that's not like push people over. But if there's a rail like coming up on my rail, I'm going to use my form to kind of like fender as I'm paddling, and then just all rating form to get off the wall until you can get to clean water, and then you settle in and you take your real stroke.
And I noticed that your tempo is about 90 strokes a minute. Murphy's about 100 strokes a minute. Is tempo something that you would specifically focus on in training?
No, I stole this from coaches in Australia. It was having some resistance. So there's you can just move your arms at like 120 per minute, like a hummingbird, and you're not really going to go anywhere. Like, how can I open up my hip angle and reach and get a sticky catch, kind of like you would have with kayaking, where you don't slip, and then pull your body towards your hands. So I've been doing a lot of work on my own because I was up in Monterey at the time with either dragging the bucket or wrapping a band around the front of my board, and then that way I could have more feel for the water and have a little bit more power in my rating. But one thing to Brian's credit is that increased rate for him on the way home is helping him pick up some runs that have been the difference in a ton of these nationals. So for me and my body, I can get enough power at around that number. But I'm not nerding out on my stroke rate objectively. I'm worrying about how I go against my training partners when I play around with like how much power I have versus how fast the rating is. There's a sweet spot for sure.
Interesting. All good stuff. All right, so let's continue.
The noticeable stroke of Shane Scoggins, California State, a great start for him. He has finished so many times behind Brian Murphy, not just in these short sprint races, but also distance races around the country. A change of training this year has him thinking it could be his year. Meanwhile, Ryan Matthews has now popped onto his knees, and Brian Murphy, that stroke should be very noticeable to anybody who has trained and raced with him. Coming into shore already, Murphy on the left-hand side of the screen, Scoggins on the right, a little runner for Scoggins as he tries to milk the faster surface water more with him.
So one more quick pause. On the way out, prior to the first turning buoy, I noticed that you sat up. Were you able to get on somebody's side wash? I noticed Cooper Halligan was on your side wash. Or were you just comfortable getting in a quick breath before getting around the cans?
There's a pissing match happening there, where if we are all packed up and I don't see a clean lane, I'm not going to drag somebody into first place. And so if you watch some Stuart McLaughlin, he'll actually back off before the first can as well.
Yeah.
Bunch everybody up, and then he'll get his clean water turn, and they'll all be tangled together. In this particular case, it was, okay, this guy's in my side wash. I'm probably in someone else's side wash too. It's kind of hard to see there.
Yeah, it was tough to tell. I thought maybe it was Brian's.
I think Brian and I are almost even.
Yep.
That one. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm pretty much locked into your bow wing because like the side wash is the breaking point of what's coming off the bow, and then the breaking point of what's coming off the middle is what's coming off the tail. So I already feel comfortable that I'm locked in, like barring hitting the can or having a substantial wave, like I can paddle and stay with him until it's a better time to make a move. And so we kind of you jostle and don't give up position through the apex, because if you're the guy on the inside, you probably pick up a portion of a board length every time everyone changes angle. So are we on a video right now, or are you just listening?
Yeah, well, let's go back to the video.
Murphy on the left-hand side of the screen, Scoggins on the right, a little runner for Scoggins as he tries to milk the faster surface water more than he can, digging so deep, trying to keep his chest low to the board, and he's got about a half board length lead coming in. It'll now depend on their positioning as they head for that finishing chute, but just like that, Murphy fighting back on the white board from LA County, trying to win what would be his 10th national title on the board. The last little bit to shore, it's going to come to the run up the beach. Scoggins has the inside line, and it's an upset. Shane Scoggins from California State beats the man who had seemed to have a lock on the top spot for a decade. All Murphy can do is run up alongside of him, and as the back markers come in, the celebration has begun. Scoggins gets rid of the bridesmaid label. Over the past 11 years, Brian Murphy has won 9 national titles and placed second twice, but this year, it was Shane Scoggins' turn.
All right, so we're recording. All right, so Hummer notes that you picked up a tiny little runner in such flat conditions. Did you anticipate something so small could make a difference in the race? I know to the less experienced eye, they may not have noticed that you did in fact pick up a little tiny bump, a little runner. What they will notice are the flat conditions. Could you just explain what happened there at that point in the race?
Yeah, so Brian and it looks like Brian came around the cannon inside position. And usually that means I had to paddle like a little bit further. So we're actually exchanging runs the entire time. Like he'll pick up a little bump, I'll pick up a little bump. And depending on where you are in your stroke, if your weight is forward, you're going to feel that lift up under your tail. And one thing Brian's done incredibly for decades is picking up his rating every time the bump comes under his tail and grabbing like a portion of a board length. And so at this point, like I cannot let him get in front of me because then I have to deal with his wash's interruption in my line, and then B, I need to stay accessible in case he gets a run so I can latch back onto his wash. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to push him to the outside of an already narrow finishing chute.
Mm-hmm.
And in a perfect world, the finishing chute would actually be significantly wider, and he would have had a fair shake at it. But there's don't give up the line. Make them go around you to pass you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of that happening there. Well, a lot of it, especially the finish. Minus points for wagging the finger, but I think there's fair game in getting your shoulders in front of the guy.
Absolutely,
Brian,
absolutely. And you know what? For those of you who have never been to Virginia Beach, even in such flat conditions, there can be a tremendous sweep depending on the incoming or outgoing tide. I believe into the Chesapeake. So I don't recall what the tide was doing at that particular moment, but there can be a tremendous effect. You can end up, if we're talking about the flag line, you can end up 5 flags to the left or to the right, depending on the tide. So it could have been that, you and Brian got swept back over to the right-hand side as well. And if I recall from the surf race, that happened with myself and Rodney as well. So the sweep was probably heading in that direction.
For you guys at home, if you're going full YouTube nerd, you need to go back and look at all of the swim races that Kai Hurst had to finish with an even run. And there's this thing that Kai used to do, that we would do during body surfing practices, where as soon as you get to your feet, you take one big high step. You're not running. He's single-legged forward jumping. And so trying to get out of the knee-deep water to something that looks more like a run quicker while someone else is still pushing into the water with the thighs. It's that's the game changer right there. Brian tooled me on that for years. So the fact that I was able to pull this off once at a nationals is that was part of why this felt good. But yeah, definite minus points for the finger wag. That's karma.
That's okay. Everybody's done it. I shouldn't say everybody. Most people who have won a race or even come close to a race, that's what you don't want to do is start claiming it and then somebody runs by you at the end. Everybody's seen those videos in all different sports. Oh man. So at least that didn't happen. And before we started the video, Shane, we were just having a chat and I asked you, had you ever beaten Brian heading into nationals? Because as Craig points out, you had finished second place, countless times. So had you beaten him heading into this nationals, and how did you overcome that in this particular race?
So over the course of my career, Brian had definitely spent the time in Australia competing at a high level, and he had a lot of these skills and tactics that it took me a long time to develop. So I would start to get him here and there at indescript races that don't really matter, and then I'd start maybe periodically beating him at regionals. But he had the uncanny ability to show up at nationals. And so whether it's part of his metagame to let you had it, feel good about yourself, that was part of what made this really important to me. Is I probably had 6 times where I came in behind him, 6 or 8 at nationals, and I knew that I could paddle every bit as fast as him because I've been able to beat him at other times, not consistently, but we'd go back and forth.
That's great. That's great, and it definitely is is something that people at home should take note of your perseverance to keep chipping away, and you finally put it all together on the big stage and executed to perfection. So you did a great job, and you had many other great accomplishments throughout the rest of your career. So we appreciate you taking the time to sit down and go through the race with us today, Shane. So thanks a lot, and until next time, thanks everybody. Take care.